Welcome to the 510 podcast. I am Heidi Matheson, and my goal in the next 5 to 10 minutes is to bring you some encouragement from the Word of God. In Ephesians 5 verse 10, Paul tells us to find out what pleases the Lord. And the writer of Hebrews says that without faith it is impossible to please God. So together, let's strengthen our faith with the Word of God. Philippians 3 verses 18 to 20 says, "Many live as enemies of the cross of Christ. Their destiny is destruction. Their God is their stomach, and their glory is in their shame. Their mind is set on earthly things. But our citizenship is in heaven." Citizenship is the state of belonging somewhere, usually a country. Citizenship implies that if you meet certain conditions, certain criteria, that you then receive benefits, protection, security. You also receive a passport, which allows you to travel freely in and out of the country without the need of a visa or special permissions. Sometimes people live in countries of which they're not citizens, but merely residents. They may need a special stamp in their passport, giving permission to live and work in that country. Christians are people who made a decision to follow the life and the teachings of Jesus. They've made a decision to live their lives according to the principles in the Bible. Christians are citizens of heaven, but residents of earth. And in fact, the Bible tells us to view our life on earth as a temporary journey. We read in 1 Peter 1 verses 17 to 19, "Live out your time as foreigners here in reverent fear. For you know that it was not with perishable things, such as silver or gold, that you were redeemed from the empty way of life handed down to you from your ancestors, but with the precious blood of Christ, a lamb without blemish or defect." We have temporary residency here on earth. We have a stamp in our heavenly passports, giving us permission to live and work here, but this is not our home. Heaven is our home. We should be living according to the criteria and conditions set out for us as citizens of heaven, living as visitors here on earth. In 1 Peter chapter 2 verses 11 to 12, Peter says, "Dear friends, I urge you as foreigners and exiles to abstain from sinful desires which wage war against your soul. Live such good lives among the pagans that, though they accuse you of doing wrong, they may see your good deeds and glorify God on the day He visits us." The Apostle Peter is telling us here that as foreigners on this place called earth, we should still be living as if we are in heaven, because we're citizens of heaven. We should be careful not to allow the ways of this world to sway us from our citizenship. The Greek word used here for foreigners is also translated as strangers or sojourners, people who live in a place without the right of citizenship, people whose home is somewhere else. And Peter is telling us that as Christians, heaven is our home. So the culture of this world and this society is not our culture. We're to live with the culture of heaven. What has become normal, accepted behavior in this culture may not, and often should not, be normal, accepted behavior for citizens of heaven. And in order to keep our heavenly citizenship, we need to live according to heaven's standards. Did you know that Hebrews tells us in chapter 11 that even after Abraham reached the land that God had promised him, that he was like a foreigner living in tents? Because it says in verse 10 that Abraham was confidently looking forward to a city with eternal foundations, a city designed and built by God. Even when Abraham arrived at the destination that God called him to, he was still a temporary resident, because heaven was his home. So how do we live as citizens of heaven? John tells us in his first letter, in chapter 2, verses 15 to 17. Do not love the world or anything in the world. If anyone loves the world, love for the Father is not in them. For everything in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life, comes not from the Father, but from the world. The world and its desires pass away, but whoever does the will of God lives forever. We might live in this world, in this society, in this culture, but we are not of this world. And John is telling us not to live according to the culture of this world. For example, if you were to visit the Yanomami tribe of the Amazon rainforest, you would be exposed to a very strange, traditional funeral ceremony. When someone dies in their community, they leave the body to decompose in the forest for about 6 weeks. They then cremate the remains, and they collect all of those ashes from the cremation. They mix them with fermented bananas to create a soup, which is then eaten by members of the community, because they believe that a person's physical body must be completely removed from this earth in order for the spirit to achieve peace. Now, if I visited or went to live in one of these communities for any length of time, this would be a cultural practice that I could not get behind. You would not find me drinking the remains of another human being, for many reasons. I may be living in their world, but I would not be following the practices of their world. This is what Peter and John are telling us to do. Yes, we are living in this society, on this earth, but we should not be living according to the culture of the society. We should be living according to the culture of heaven. So here's a question to ask ourselves. What societal norms have we adopted which oppose the teachings in the Bible? What has become acceptable to us that shouldn't be? Now, this could be different for each one of us. It could be to do with the way we conduct relationships. Are we living according to the Bible standards when it comes to dating and marriage? It could be how we conduct ourselves in business dealings. Are we honest? Do we stay on the right side of the law? Or are we trying to get as close to the edge of what is lawful as possible before we fall off? It could be to do with the language we use, the things we expose our eyes and our minds to, the things we read or watch or listen to. In Colossians 3, Paul tells us to set our hearts on things above where Christ is, and to set our minds on things above, not on earthly things. He goes on to give us a list of the things that belong to the earthly nature, attitudes and ideas that we should be avoiding. I encourage you to read this list in Colossians 3 verses 5 to 9. And then he tells us this in verses 12 to 14. Therefore, as God's chosen people, holy and dearly loved, clothe yourself with compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. Bear with each other and forgive one another if any of you has a grievance against someone. Forgive as the Lord forgave you. And over all these things put on love, which binds them all together in perfect unity. Friends, let's live as citizens of heaven. Let's reject the societal norms which oppose the teachings of the Bible. Let's invest in our eternal lives, in our eternal home, because we are temporary residents on earth. This is not our home. Heaven is our home. Thank you for listening. I hope you were encouraged today. You can find the 510 podcast on Facebook and Instagram. And if you found today's encouragement helpful, please subscribe and consider sharing it with a friend.